Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So I'm carrying on my post-mortem on the late presidency of Donald John Trump, and looking back to how he very badly mishandled the Puerto Rico situation seems to be largely forgotten when a hurricane struck Puerto Rico. Now, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. It is not a state of the United States, but pursuant to the Jones Act of 1912, all Puerto Ricans are American citizens. They have the right to move the United States itself any time without filling out a single piece of paper. They can live there, work there, vote there. But whilst they live in Puerto Rico, they don't have a vote for the presidency. They don't have a vote for the Senate. They do have someone in the House of Representatives, but he or she can speak but not vote on their behalf. The same situation pertains to Washington, D.C. Anyway, so when Puerto Rico was stricken by this terrible hurricane, which wrought such devastation over this delightful Caribbean island, President Trump scarcely lifted a finger to help them. Now, the former president, he whinges so much about the press not being entirely pliant, but when hundreds of his countrymen are killed and thousands more are injured or suffering grievously, are homeless, the president is completely indifferent to their plight. He can't feel any empathy for anyone else. The president's there to try and help people who can't help themselves, to provide for people in these emergency situations. Why else do we have governments? Anyway, it was not a state, is not a state to this day, therefore it couldn't vote for the president, so he was indifferent to them. Now, the Republican Party is often burnishing its patriotic credentials. You've got to be pharisaical enough to be wearing that American flag badge on your lapel. But anyway, you would think they would wish to assist my fellow Americans in their hour of need, but despite their distress, he didn't care. He felt not the least dismay on their behalf. Anyway, you might assume that if a U.S. territory wished to become an integral part of the United States, wished to be raised to the status of a state, that they would be welcomed with open arms by the Grand Old Party. Well, you'd be dead wrong. The Republicans do not want Puerto Ricans because they're Hispanic, and there's an element of racialism to that. And all right, there are a few Hispanic Republicans, and there are some Hispanic people vote for the Republican Party, but there's a lot of psephological self-interest to that. So Puerto Ricans, there's a very high chance they vote Democrat. The Democratic Party is very dominant on that island. So the last thing the GOP needs is another 2 Democratic senators. Now, Puerto Rico's population is not negligible. If in the rank order of states, if it was up to 51 states, it would fit in there about number 30. So it would at least mean at least 4 more representatives for the Democrats in the House of Representatives, 6 electoral votes in the Electoral College, and that they'd be reliable for the Democrats. So I suspect that it's almost entirely down to cynical electoral calculation that the Republicans are doing this. Remember, Republicans, they welcomed in Alaska in 1959. They welcomed in Hawaii in 1959 to join the Union. They've been territories up until that point. So coming back to investigations into the quantum president, well, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they investigated his campaign's very extensive links to what's it called, Служба внешняя разведка, which is External Intelligence Agency, a Russia service, I should say. There was a mountain of the most incontrovertible proof about knowing contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence officers. The FBI, they listened to Michael Flynn's phone calls to the Russian ambassador before Trump was elected. Flynn was in material breach of the Jones Act, of the Logan Act. He strove to subvert U.S. foreign policy. So anyway, you can only people can only carry on diplomacy on behalf of the United States with the express permission of the president. Flynn was promising to reverse the Magnitsky Act in return from sanctions being dropped, in return for assistance from the Russian Federation. So the Russians also wanted sanctions to be discontinued. So anyway, Trump had this unseemly eagerness to please Putin and others. We know that the Russian intelligence hacked the computer system of the Democratic National Committee and found information that was useful to the Grand Old Party, handed over to them, and indeed it was utilised. Embarrassing information about Hillary Clinton. Trump called upon the Russia, if you're listening, carry on hacking the emails. And that's what he said at a rally, knowing he was live on television. He's that shameless. He believes he has total impunity. It's his own Fifth Avenue principle. He could shoot somebody dead on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight in the middle of New York City and get away scot-free. And that's how he's lived his life, hiding in plain sight. So anyway, but you can't say he was hiding his desire to assist Russian espionage against the United States. Subtlety and discretion have never been amongst his fortes. So when he was asked in the 2020 campaign, would you accept similar assistance from a foreign government in this campaign? And he wouldn't give a committal answer. Wow, he demurred. So that's obviously affirmative silence by saying nothing. In a sense, he was saying, yes, he would accept such help. Staggering. That he's so indisciplined, he just can't cover up. Sometimes he can't lie when he needs to, or even say nothing. I mean, saying nothing, as I say, is a bit incriminating. So Trump's eagerness to please North Korea, the Russian Federation, various tyrannical regimes in Central Asia, was in stark contrast to traditional republicanism. Say what you like about previous Republican presidents, but they opposed communist dictators. They took a firm line. Take Ronald Reagan, in the face of evil, against the evil empire. He excoriated the appeasement of America's deadly foes. He said it was betraying your friends to be rewarding your enemies. It was jaw-dropping that a Republican let Trump get away with this, but doing just that, and nary a word breathed against him in Republican circles once John McCain died. So the body language when Trump met Putin said it all. It was the only time he was servile. He was there as a supplicant. He was uncharacteristically reticent. Why was he feeling so chastened or subdued? Anyway, Trump knows that Putin has some sort of hold over him. Is it sexual blackmail? Is it the PP tape? Is it financial control? Whatever it is, there's no doubt who was in command of that meeting. Putin certainly had him by the short and curlies. So Trump was hesitant. He was lacking in his characteristic confidence and ebullience. Where was his brio and combativeness then? Why doesn't he insult Putin? He insults virtually every other world leader you could mention. So in 2016, French, British, German, Dutch, Australian, and other Western intelligence agencies warned the Americans that the Russians were actively assisting the Trump campaign, and the campaign knowingly accepted this help from the Russian Federation. And Trump denied all this, just like Republicans will deny climate change and deny evolution and deny anything which is irrefragably proven. So which is more likely, that every intelligence agency in the Western world should invent all this, or a pathological liar should tell an untruth? Anyway, well, let's look on to his legal liabilities. So the Attorney General was Bill Barr. He was used as Trump's personal lawyer rather than the lawyer for the United States as such, because Trump doesn't distinguish between public and private. Lawsuits were filed against Trump as a private citizen, and they were dealt with by Barr. They weren't filed against the office of the United States. So the AG is supposed to act on behalf of the US government and not for the individual who happens to hold the presidency at the time. The full story of Trump's cooperation with the Russian government came out. This is a cooperation with them before he became president. He said at a rally, as I pointed out, he wanted the Russians to hack Hillary's emails, and disinformation pumped out by bots or by the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia, was a great boon to the Trump campaign. And it was easily enough to get him over the line in those three key swing states. Only 80,000 votes is what separated Hillary from the presidency. So Vladimir Putin's, one of his allies, this ultra-nationalist, militarist politician, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, toasted Trump on camera, "Do победы Donald Trump," to the victory of Donald Trump. Putin made some admiring statements about Trump in the press during the campaign. The compliment was returned. Never before had Russia supported a candidate for the US presidency. They'd normally maintained diplomatic silence on this. So his endorsement was very clear. Anyway, so going back to the Muslim ban, which Trump introduced just days after he became president, it only banned people from a few poorer Muslim countries, and it banned people even if they weren't Muslims but happened to be citizens of that country. It was totally illogical, even in its own terms. The 9/11 terrorists, they all came from Saudi Arabia, which wasn't on the banned list. And there were exemptions, so you could be a Muslim from one of those banned countries but allowed in. It was unworkable. It was religiously discriminatory. And since 9/11, Islamic terrorists have killed almost zero people in the United States. Okay, there was that Boston Marathon bombing. Whereas guns have killed over 33,000 people per annum, almost all of them fired by American citizens. So Trump didn't care about gun crime. So that was a good old American crime. So what's the common factor here? It's not the people being killed. It's not violent deaths he care about. It's foreigners are the problem. It's a different religion. It's what he's against, not violence. So despite appealing to the basest Islamophobic prejudices, Trump was no slouch in accepting the Islamic dollar. He went to Saudi Arabia and he literally embraced the absolute monarch of the most Islamic extremist country in the world. He had Mohammed bin Salman as his guest in the White House. He's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He's the effective ruler of the country. And then you come to the Highland school shootings. Trump talked about confiscating guns first and doing the legal process afterwards. Now the National Rifle Association, they wouldn't like that one. The idea was swiftly dropped. So Trump was pro-gun, but his events did not allow guns in. Why? For his safety. Oh, so you're safer without guns. I thought as a gun nut you would want as many guns as possible around. Anyway, Trump abased himself before Kim Jong-un. This savage tyrant was treated with a cordiality that he extended to nobody else. By contrast, America's allies were treated with abrasiveness, to say the least. They were betrayed. Ukraine was battling for its freedom, its very life. And Trump said that military aid was going to be contingent upon them making up lies about Joe Biden and releasing that to the media. NATO leaders were routinely insulted, and America's foes were constantly coddled. So the president came to office with a concatenation of psychological flaws. He has a personality disorder. He's a dark triad of malignant narcissism, and he's got not the least modicum of empathy for anybody else. And his constant crowing about his own supposed successes is often mistaken for confidence, when someone who's really confident wouldn't be impelled to be incessantly blowing their own trumpet. So Donald Trump said he could have risen to the top of the military. And when did he ever show courage, moral or physical? Is he athletic or disciplined? The claim was utterly risible. Pulling out of the Paris deal was another thing he did, and that was applauded by the anti-environmental lobby in 2017. Polluters were elated that they could poison the planet with gay abandon. So his base are irrationalists. They disbelieve in evolution. They disbelieve in climate change. They believe in anything except the truth. So that's them. Irrefutable scientific proof doesn't sway them. They're anti-enlightenment. So they're not reasoned into their asinine beliefs, so they can't be reasoned out of them. So Trump's determination to aggravate climate change and poison the air went down well in coal country in West Virginia, a very poor state that he won because the Democrats are concerned about the environment. But what are we going to do? You've got to give these people decently paid jobs to move to. So Trump planned to move the US Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He fulfilled his pledge, and so he was heedless of Arab protests. Now, the Ishmaelites have largely abandoned their Palestinian brethren, and there was less pushback than you might have anticipated. And that's because the Gulf states are more preoccupied with a possible war against Iran, and they want American and even Israeli assistance. So Trump is warmly endorsed by neo-Nazis in the United States, who are often viciously anti-Jewish, despite the fact that he'll do anything that Israel wants, the only American president to ever had a town named after him in Israel. So it shows the cognitive dissonance, the imbecility, the bottomless ignorance of many of his supporters. That's enough for the moment. Toodaloo.